Well, good morning. Happy Sabbath. It's good to be here in Delaware this Sabbath morning and to be able to worship. It feels kind of like an eternity since I'm not coming up during the middle of the week for our time together here, but as we've done Revelation Speaks, you guys have been able to be with me every night for most of the week that are watching things online. And of course, as we are together worshiping, blessed to be together this Sabbath morning with our sister churches in New Carlisle and Springfield. Here in Delaware, the Drapers are visiting with us. It's been a bit since I've had a chance to see them. And Lowell, you're with us this Sabbath morning, Andy's dad. So glad to see you here this Sabbath morning. And I know they're in Springfield. I'm so thankful that Lane and Brody, Jenna's sister and Stephen's sister-in-law and their nephew are able to be worshiping with us. So I pray that you are enjoying what is taking place with worship this morning. And in New Carlisle, so thankful that Ed, you're there with Susan, and that Larry, you've come back from the land of Kentucky to be with us. And we're also glad that Brian and Maya are also there with us this morning. I pray that as you are worshiping, that you will be blessed by the service this morning as well. And of course, we're all able to come together and enjoy our fellowship with one another. So just thank you for that, that we have this time to come together. Well, this morning we're talking about conquering gossip. And as we're dealing with gossip, it is a challenge to overcome the tongue. And as we see this morning, we have, of course, the text that we had read for us that Cindy did an excellent job on. It says, no man can tame what? The tongue. It's what kind of evil? An unruly evil. There's evil and then there's unruly evil. This is pretty terrible to have unruly evil. I'd hate to imagine what unruly good looks like. I'd rather have unruly good, though, over unruly evil. It's full of deadly poison. The tongue is full of deadly poison. So we'll be exploring that this morning. But as we get ready to do that, let's bow our heads for a word of prayer. Great Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you that we have this time together that we can spend in your word. Bless us, keep us, and help us to see clearly your great love for us, and especially how we can overcome and conquer gossip. In Jesus' name, amen. So we deal with this issue of gossip. There is a problem with it, right? There is a problem with gossip. The gossip problem. And James deals a lot with this in chapter 3 of his letter that he writes. And so let's take a look at what he happens to say here. He says there in verses 3 through 5 that we do what with horses? Put bits in their mouth. How many of you ever put a bit in a horse's mouth? Nobody here? Okay, Jean's raised her hand. What's that like to put a bit in a horse's mouth? She says it's difficult. Yeah, it's not the easiest thing, especially if the horse doesn't want to have the bit put in there, because when you put the bit in there, what's that doing to the horse? What's the horse giving to you, sort of? Giving control, right? It's a way to control the horse. So the horse might be a little reluctant to have the bit put in its mouth. It's like, no, I'm not going to do this. I know this trick. I've seen this before. No, I'm not doing that again. So maybe a little bit of resistance there about getting the bit in there. And then when you have the bit in there, you know that expression, chomping at the bit. And if you've ever ridden a horse, if you've had a horse chomp at the bit and it's there, it's got the bit in its mouth. And the bit, of course, is made from metal, and it will be there, and it's chomping on things, chomping at the bit. And it's not always because it's wanting to go somewhere. Sometimes it's just, it's there, chomping on the bit. It's kind of like having a piece of gum in your mouth and not chewing it. It's just like, how often are you able to take a piece of gum and put it in your mouth and just park it there and not worry about it, right? No, it's like I'm chewing on it. So we see here that James is talking about we put bits in horses' mouths so that they will obey us, and we're able to turn their body, but there's reluctance there. There's a fight there. And then he says, well, look at the ships. Although they are large, and if you've ever seen a ship in dry dock and looked at that, or you've maybe been in a canoe, how big is the paddle that you use to turn the boat? Not very big, considering the size of the boat. But again, if you're really wanting to turn the boat really quick and you've got a big, huge ocean liner, how fast does that little rudder turn the boat? Are you doing turns on a dime? Are you out there, it's like, hey, we can do the slalom and we can get around all those cones on the course real fast. No, right? It takes a while to make the turn. So even though they're driven by fierce winds, they are turned by a small rudder wherever the pilot desires. So there is control, but again, it can be a little bit of a difficult task. But now the tongue. How big is the tongue in comparison to your mouth? Or to your body, sorry. It's in your mouth. How big is your tongue compared to your body? It's pretty small. It's definitely smaller. I won't stick my tongue out, but it's smaller in my hand. Yeah, if you want to compare, you can. If you got your cell phone, you can take it out and look at your tongue and see how it compares to your hand. But right, your tongue is smaller than your hand, so it's not that big of a thing. But notice that it, being small, still boasts great things. And of course, as we are in it seems like we're always in a season of politics, of elections. Seems like it's never ending, doesn't it? It's like we go from a presidential election to a midterm election to special elections. It gets tiring, especially when you look at all of the great things that those politicians' tongues are boasting all about, right? I will do this for you. All right, okay. I always like when it's the presidential elections. If you elect me president, this is what I'm going to do. That's great. You've got Congress on board, and you haven't even been elected as president yet. You're a miracle worker. I mean, the only other person I know that could do that would be Jesus. And so that's pretty high if you're saying that you can give us all of the things that you're promising. All right, the tongue boasts great things. Great things. But the problem is as we look at this unruliness of the tongue, as we see what is there, that the challenge that exists for us is that this little thing can set the world on fire. And it is difficult to tame. As a matter of fact, here in Exodus 20:16, and in Exodus 20:16, we see that you're not supposed to bear false witness against your neighbor. What is false witness? What's another thing we could call that? Lying. What's another thing we could call that? What are we talking about today? Gossip, right? Bearing false witness is gossip. It's not a truth. Gossip is a thing that's not truthful, right? Generally speaking. Sometimes it is a true thing, but we're saying it to be malicious. And if you're bearing false witness, why are you bearing false witness? Because you're trying to be malicious. You're trying to get an outcome for your side of things, or at least to make something worse for somebody else. So bearing false witness is gossiping. And gossiping is bearing false witness. So we've got a gossip problem. We have a thing that's in our heads that says things sometimes before we even have a chance to think about what we're saying. And it just comes running right out of our mouths. And I'm certain all of you, and you don't have to raise your hands, but all of you have probably had that experience of, after you said it, you're like, oh, I didn't mean to say that. I wish that I wouldn't have said that. How many of you have been having an argument with your spouse, and you're like, oh, that wasn't good. I just shot myself in both my feet. It wasn't even a matter of choosing. It was just like double-barreled shotgun, blam, hit them both. We have a hard time controlling the tongue, and this is the case with gossip. Because, to be honest, in our sinful conditions, do we like gossip? Yeah, Andy's being honest. He's like giving a really good affirmation to that. Yeah, Maybe some of you there. And by the way, Springfield, move to the front. Don't be sitting in the back. Those are the cheap seats. Got to go up to the expensive seats up front. But as we look at what takes place and we see the struggles with gossip, it's a challenge because we actually do like to hear it. Oh, here's some juicy tidbits. I love to hear that. I mean, if you think about it, some of the shows that are on TV, and maybe less so now, but, you had a lot of the shows that are on TV, especially with dealing with, like, the celebrities, and they would, dish the gossip of what was going on in Hollywood, and you'd hear this and hear that, and, oh, boy, isn't that fantastic? Isn't that juicy? And if you think even a lot about the news stories that are on, what are they relying on? Oh, that we're going to give you some sort of salacious detail that you're just going to want to hear about. And even as they try to, have you ever listened to how they broadcast things, how they set things up? Even if you're watching the Weather Channel, they make the weather salacious. Oh, join us and we'll tell you how this storm's going to affect you. It's a storm. It's probably going to affect me in this way, especially like, say Hurricane Ian. I don't know if any of you saw this, and it was Jim Cantore, and I'm putting his name out there because it was Jim Cantore, and if you watch the Weather Channel, then you know Jim Cantore. But he was out there broadcasting and talking about Hurricane Ian and got hit by a tree branch, and I didn't see the clip, so I don't know if it was like a stick and we're calling it a tree branch by blowing things up, or if it was actually a tree branch. But the thing is like, Jim, you know how you don't get hit by a tree branch during a hurricane? Don't be outside during the hurricane. But he's out there, oh yeah, the wind. And sometimes it's pure gossip. I did see one time when they were broadcasting for the storm that we had this last spring that hit in the Northeast, and they were talking about the snow, and they were saying, oh yeah, the snow's really deep. The problem is the snow really wasn't that deep. But they were trying to make important fact about the storm being problematic for so many people, and so the Weather Channel person was there, and they had this unfolding yardstick. I don't know why it was, except for compactability, an unfolding one, but they had one, and they were sticking it in the snow. And it was like maybe about 24 inches deep. You're like, ooh, wow, that's really deep, 24 inches. But then in the background, you could see somebody walking along the sidewalk back there where the snow was like only about that high. Because they were on the leeward side of the building, and so all of the snow had piled up around on the back side, so they got their 24 inches. Gossip, right? So that people are like, oh yeah, wow, that's a terrible storm. Got to watch and see what's happening because you never know. That snow is terrible. Sneak up on you. Bearing false witness, gossiping. We have a tendency towards this as human beings. So we see this and we come to the problem in Christianity. And here's something that you can quote as a quote. That we have a tendency with sexual sins, treating them as the worst of sins, but often as Christians, we don't think there's anything wrong about gossiping about those sexual sins. Right? We say, oh, did you hear about what's going on between those two? And, did they really? Oh, their marriage is on the rocks because of what? Oh, that's terrible. What a shame. The problem is there any difference between gossiping and the sexual sin? No, same thing, right? Sin is sin. So we look and we see there is a problem that we can observe with gossip. But rule 1, how do we conquer gossip? Rule 1, how about just stop? Is that a good rule? Just stop. Of course, that might be easier said than done, but the reality is just stop. If you want to not be gossiping, just stop gossiping. Well, what does this mean to just stop gossiping? Well, let's take a look here at what Paul writes in 1 Corinthians, and I've noticed this from the New International Version, just merely because they've used some updated, more modern English that really points this out. Don't be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. Truthful? Is that true? Good character is corrupted by bad company. I know that as I've talked with some of you, and I even know from my own experiences, what happens when you hang around people that are cursing and swearing all day long? Terry's here, you start cursing and swearing, Andy's over here smiling, and I know some of you in New Carlisle and Springfield are doing the same thing, right? You start hanging around people that are cursing and swearing, and pretty soon you're doing the same thing. Bad company corrupts good character. So how do you avoid that? Well, Paul goes on, he says, come back to your senses as you ought and stop sinning. So what do you need to do? Just stop. For there are some who are ignorant of God, and I say it's to shame. So he's noticing that the problem is that in dealing with the idea of just stop sinning, just stop it, is there are some who are ignorant about this and don't strive to overcome. It's, again, I like to be with the people who are bad company because they're more exciting and fun. That group's, I want to hang out with them. They're the cool kids. But we look and we see this is a problem. This is a problem because we need to simply just stop sinning. We need to stop gossiping in this case. If we want to conquer gossip, just stop gossiping. Stop listening to the gossip too. And somebody comes up, hey, did you hear about, whoa, wait a second. Are you going to be telling me gossip? Yeah, I got some hot juicy gossip for you. No, thanks, I don't want any today. And walk away. All right? That's the way to stop gossip. Because as we look at gossip, and we see gossip doesn't gain any traction when it doesn't meet the road, right? Does gossip get anywhere if it's not hitting the road? Does a car get anywhere when it doesn't hit the road? If we jack Andy's Corvette up and he's there and he's got the gas pedal down all the way on the floorboards, is that car going to go anywhere as long as it's jacked up off the road and the tires aren't meeting the road? It sounds cool, but it's not going anywhere. I guess we'll just put up a little video display thing, big screen, and it'll look like he's driving down the road, and he'll be, right? Gossip doesn't get anywhere if it doesn't have any place to get traction. So you can just merely stop it, or by stopping it, you can just say, I'm not interested. I don't do gossip. Thank you kindly. And turn away. What else can we look at from Scripture that will give us an understanding as kind of a rule that we can follow that will help us to conquer the gossip problem? Well, let's look at Matthew 18. Rule 2, see Matthew 18. And there Jesus talks about if your brother sins against you, what you should do. So let's take a look at what Matthew is writing here, what Matthew 18 talks about. It says here, and have no fellowship with the unfruitful work of darkness, but rather expose them, for it is shameful even to speak of those things which are done by them in secret. That's actually before what we're getting into. And then as we come along here, let me go back and let me actually pull out something here from Matthew 18. It says, moreover, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. Don't leave it to be a secret thing. If he hears you, you have gained a brother. But if he will not hear you, take with you one or two more, then by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. And if he refuses to hear them, tell it to the church. But if he refuses even to hear the church, let him be like a heathen and a tax collector. And that was pretty bad in Jesus' day. That was pretty bad in Jesus' day, to be a heathen and a tax collector. So let them be basically anathema to you. But notice that you're supposed to first go to whoever you're having the problem with, and instead of gossiping about it, hey, there's Sue, and, she did this, and don't you think that's just terrible that she did that? She didn't even say sorry. She didn't even say sorry. She's got to be terrible. Well, that might be true, right? She may be doing something that's not good, but is it my responsibility to go to somebody else and say, hey, have you listened to Sue and what she said, and what do you think about that? Don't you think that she's not a good person? Is that my job to do that? No, what's my job to do as a Christian? Sue, need to have a conversation with you. Is that easy all the time? Most of the time it's not, is it? We don't like conflict. Well, in following this, and if you ever come to me with this, and again, none of us are perfect, so sometimes we do kind of into the gossip, kind of like when we're out in a horse pasture. We're not trying to land in it, but we do. We're not trying to step in it, but we didn't pay attention. And the next thing you know, we're involved with it. So sometimes we make mistakes, and we entertain gossip when we know that we shouldn't. But as we look at the problems of gossip, as we see what's taking place with that, sometimes when you come to me, I might tell you, have you followed Matthew 18 and gone and talked to them about this? Now, you have several choices on which you can do in regarding that. We're going to look at this here in a second, but to recognize our first duty is to go and talk to that person. If we have an issue, our duty according to Matthew 18 with Jesus is to go and talk. And that if they won't hear something, we'll then take a couple other people to verify that, because in the church we actually do have church discipline. But we see here that true Christians talk to people, not about people, right? True Christians talk to people, not about them. So look at 3 steps in the gossiping problem here and stopping this that come out of Matthew 18. Number 1, the problem between the parties is resolved. Matthew 18 is followed. Jim goes to Sue, says, hey, you stepped on my toe the other day. You didn't say sorry. That really hurt my feelings. Sue says, oh, I stepped on your toe. I didn't even realize I stepped on your toe. I apologize. Or, yeah, I was being a little bit malicious. I stepped on your toe, but, it's been bothering me, and thank you for coming to me. Didn't really know how to approach it myself, but I do ask for forgiveness for that. And Jim says, well, yeah, that's okay. And, things are good after that. You're there, and you're trying to help your wife, and you burn her favorite dress while you're ironing it. You leave the iron there. Sorry. Hopefully you find forgiveness. But there's been a problem, right? You got things resolved. Well, the other thing that also can possibly happen with this is that at least one of the party, if not both in the party, and this, but as we look here, the party with the problem realizes, she stepped on my toe. It wasn't that big of a deal. I can let it go. I am big enough to let that go. It hurt. I was kind of disappointed that she didn't say sorry, but it's not big enough of a problem to make a big deal about. So I'm going to let it just slide. Just let it go. And sometimes, most of the time, actually, that's how things get resolved if you follow Matthew 18. You look at the situation and you say, yeah, it's not that big of a deal. I can deal with that. They must have been having a bad day or something, and I'm not going to pursue it. Well, and then finally we see that sometimes, just like it says there in Matthew 18, the problem doesn't get resolved. The next steps are needed to be taken, and you have to get other parties involved to help find resolution to the issue at hand. And as we look at that, we see God has provided for us the ability to exercise grace, hopefully even at that point, where we may have to deal with somebody in a way that says, well, you're especially with gossip, you're gossiping, and that's being, troublesome. That's causing problems for the unity of the church. You're creating more difficulties, and so actually in Adventism we have a way of dealing with that, in which we will take a person and we will counsel with them, and we put them what's called censure. That then is something where by being censured, they're agreeing to remedial steps of understanding where they're having problems with sin and then be able to overcome that. But we're not saying, well, we're just leaving you to fend for your own. Rule 3, let's remove the gossipers, and we're going to then see how this fits here. So we see that Rule 3, remove the gossiper, have no fellowship, as Paul says in Ephesians chapter 5. Says, remove that person is basically what he's talking about. Don't have fellowship with them. Remove them from your circle of friends, of acquaintances. But notice why that's the case. Have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness. People make mistakes, yes? Do they make mistakes? Do you make mistakes? Yeah. All right? So this isn't to say, well, you made a mistake, and so we're going to remove you from fellowship. No, this is saying somebody who habitually is more a worker of darkness than a worker of light. And then what does it talk about? Rather expose them, for it is shameful even to speak of those things which are done by them in secret. That's actually what was earlier. This got mixed up in the slides. As we look here and we see, this is what we need to be observing. Because as we see this, the church doesn't lately do as good of a job with this. Sometimes when they do this, it's not done with redemptiveness. Every time we seek discipline in the church, it's for what purpose? It's for redemption, right? We don't want the person to be lost. We want the person to be saved. So our discipline should be redemptive, not retributive. You did this, we're going to get even with you. You caused this problem in the church, well, we're going to cause this problem for you. No, we want to bring that person back into fellowship. And so we see here in understanding this that gossip does not exist in a vacuum. Gossip does not exist in a vacuum. If there is no place for gossip to land, then it just simply ceases to exist. So this is, again, if there is that person that they're not following what the Bible talks about. And this applies to more than just gossip, but the problem with gossip is that of all of the sins that take place in the church, this is the one that most people don't think is a problem. Like I said, sexual sins. Oh, did you hear about this? Did you see that? And I don't know, some of you may remember the Harps, Herman and Sonny Harp, Ponder, Jennings, and Harp. If you're an Adventist, you've probably heard of that singing group. But I love Sonny Harp. Haven't talked to them for a while, but Sonny Harp, whenever they come and sing, and if Sonny is with Herman, I always love when she sings Sister Meddler. Anybody heard the song Sister Meddler? Terry has. Anybody else? Oh, you're missing a good song. Well, Sister Meddler, see, she is the good saint in the church, and she's calling up the pastor. Hey, pastor, you know, I was at church the other day, and I heard the elders talking with each other, and the one elder said to the other elder, well, times are a little bit tight, so I think you better be watching out. Tithe might drop a little bit. Oh, pastor, I was out the other day and I was eating lunch and I saw Elder Joe with Jane, and that's not his wife. So you know what's got to be going on there. Pastor, I was driving down the road and of course the song takes place, it's written before cell phones. So I pulled over to the closest payphone because I saw the youth group over by the theater, and oh, wait a second, there's a bus that just went by and I don't see the youth group, so you know where they've got to be. And then finally at the end of this song, Sister Meddler gets a call from the pastor because even though it's before cell phones, it's apparently at least at the age of, well, maybe not, maybe his wife was taking notes or something, taking the messages. But, oh yeah, hi pastor, I'm so glad you called. You got messages. Isn't it terrible, all the terrible things that happen in the church? But who's the problem? See, gossip doesn't exist in a vacuum, but sometimes it becomes necessary to deal with the consequences of that. And here we see the church manual. And we'll get to go back here a slide, hopefully. There we go. The reasons for which members shall be subject to discipline are, and this is number 2 on the list. Go back. Let's see. It's too far. Boy, the clicker's having a good time today. Technology. All right, there we are. Violation of the law of God, such as of idols, murder, stealing, profanity, gambling, Sabbath breaking, and willful and habitual what? What's that called? Gossip. The church does have it in the church manual as something in which it is possible to be disciplined. And by the way, I don't know if they've gotten the latest copy of the church manual out. I know the quote current one from 2015 is out of publication, but you can find it online in a PDF. So I would suggest to you, if you're a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, get yourself a copy of the church manual, because it has a lot of things about how your denomination and then how your local church, plus the conference and the union and the divisions and then the world church are supposed to operate. And you know, next year, for those of us here in Ohio, we have this thing called a constituency session. It now happens every 5 years. This is the first time that it will have been 5 years since we had our last constituency session. It's hard to believe it's been that long already. But we have a constituency session in which there will be, and those here in Delaware, we're going to be talking about this on Sunday at the board meeting, because we need to start getting delegates in place. So if you want to be a delegate, volunteer for that, raise your hand now, and we'll write you down. Otherwise, we will voluntold you. Springfield, New Carlisle, it's coming your way too. As a matter of fact, Springfield, we'll talk about this not this Monday, but next Monday. So yeah, put that on your calendar. New Carlisle, you get to wait till November to deal with this. Unless, of course, a bunch of people start clamoring and saying, I want to be a delegate to the constituency session. I'm going to be honest, we should actually want to be delegates to the constituency session, because it's dealing with how our church on a state level is supposed to go forward. We are to be a part of the decision-making process for the sisterhood of churches in the state of Ohio. It's important. So if you don't have a church manual, get one. That's my pitch for that. Well, and don't just get it, read it. There's some interesting things in there. But notice again, willful and habitual falsehood. Rule 4, the exception to the rule. When is there an exception? Gossiping. Is there a way to gossip without gossiping? Andy's got a really puzzled look on his face. I'm trying to see anybody else got puzzled look on what I just said. When is gossiping not gossiping? Is there a possibility for that? Well, you know, when we look at this, we can see here that when we're seeking advice about a situation, it's not the same as gossiping about one. So, Andy is there at Trillium Farms, and he's got a problem with Henrietta, because Henrietta, she's just not quite cutting the chicken quota. She's kind of laid off on the number of eggs she's supposed to produce. And Andy kind of thinks, by the way, Andy does work for a place called Trillium Farms, and they have eggs. So, and Andy is in basically it's compliance. He deals with compliance, but we'll call it quality control. That might make that a little bit better. But he runs around and makes sure that Trillium Farms is, if the state comes in and does its thing, that they're going to pass all of the tests. So I'm always talking to Andy about those chickens and what kind of conversation he has to have with them, because, Henrietta is kind of a stubborn chicken. She just doesn't want to get with the program. She's pumping out an inferior product. She's supposed to be laying white eggs, and they all come out blue. And he's talked to her about that, and Henrietta has just been really stubborn about it. And she's like, no, I like blue eggs, and I'm just going to keep pumping those out. I don't care. So he's just frustrated, and he's like, that Henrietta, she's got to be the worst chicken that has ever walked on the face of the earth. Ever clucked, ever squawked. And when she lays an egg, I know she's cackling just to make fun of me. I'm going to go talk to my boss. Walks in the door. Now, there's two things Andy could come to this discussion with his boss about Henrietta. He could say, I'm here, I got to tell you about Henrietta. She's a real piece of work. She doesn't listen to me. She doesn't respect me. As a matter of fact, every time she lays one of those blue eggs that I told her to lay as a white egg, she's laughing at me. Isn't Henrietta a terrible chicken? And what's the response that Andy's hoping his boss? Yeah, Henrietta's really bad. We need to do something about that Henrietta. That's gossip. But if Andy looks at that and says, I've tried to talk nicely to Henrietta. I've given her some extra feed. I've tried to make her cage a little bit nicer. I've tried to tried to reason with her why, hey, the one blue egg in the carton really causes a problem when the customer opens that up. They want to see uniform white eggs. So could you kind of get with the program? And I tell you what, at Easter time, we'll come out with a limited edition, and you can pump out some extra blue eggs, and we'll have some blue eggs for Easter. They're pre-dyed. It's fantastic. Be great. We can use that as a marketing tool. He's tried to do all of that, and he's like, I just don't know what to do. And he goes into his boss. He says, look, I've been trying to deal with Henrietta, and I'm not certain what's the best way to approach dealing with Henrietta. I've done a lot of things already. What do you think I should do to talk with Henrietta? And now I'm asking for advice. Is that the same as gossip? I've got a situation. I really don't know how to deal with it. How should I approach Henrietta to really, get this problem that I'm having through to her so that she can understand why this is causing such a problem for all of us? Now you've changed over. I'm looking for advice. This is that idea. You're seeking advice about the situation. You're not there gossiping about Henrietta, saying terrible chicken she is. She may be a good layer, but she just doesn't want to follow the rules about laying white eggs over blue eggs. At times like that, sometimes we do need advice, right? We need to seek out counsel. How to deal with the situation, not gossiping about the situation, and there's a difference. So that's where the exception to the rule is at, seeking advice about something. So as we look and we see we want to conquer gossip, we want to get it out. Well, we saw just stop, rule number 1, just stop, right? Rule number 2 was what? Terry's looking at the notes. She's got the guide. If you've got the guide, you can be looking at the notes too. It's open book test. We look at Matthew, right? Matthew 18. Follow Matthew 18. Go to the person. What was the third one? Was number 3? Remove the gossiper. Sometimes that's necessary. And then rule number 4. What are we talking about? There is an exception to the rule when you're seeking advice. So as we look at this and we see the problems with gossip, if we really want to conquer gossip, you know what the other thing that you can ultimately do is, if you have time to gossip, guess what you have time for? If you have time to gossip, what do you have time for? You have time for study, prayer, and witnessing. Isn't that what we're supposed to be doing as followers of Jesus, as his disciples? Spending time in his word, learning who he is. Spending time in prayer, conversing with him to take our problems to him and take even just having a conversation to him, and then take what we have had our life changed about and share that and witness to others about what it means to be a disciple and what Jesus can do in our lives. And if you're busy doing that, do you have time to gossip? Nope. You don't have time to gossip if you're busy being a true disciple of Jesus. Well, I hope this has been a little bit of a help as we look at conquering gossip. And, to be honest, I haven't noticed a terrible problem until Plains with this, so I'm thankful for that. But as we look, it's always helpful to remember those things that we have in our lives that might creep in as a temptation. So just a good reminder for us. And if you are gossiping and that's something you're trying to overcome, well, follow the 3 rules that are there. And then when you hit rule number 4, try to think about how can I approach this where I'm looking for advice about a problem as opposed to gossiping about a problem. And God will bless us in mighty ways. Well, let us stand as we sing our closing song, Hail Him, the King of Glory.